Once upon a time there were two little girls named Deb. One little girl grew up to be a preacher while the other grew up to be a pagan, and they both grew up to be the very best of friends. Join the preacher and the pagan as they take a fresh look at Christianity, from the inside out and the outside in.
Welcome to the Preacher and the Pagan. Deb Sutter, you are out in the great Canadian wilderness.
I am. Well, not quite a wilderness, but definitely a lot of green out here.
That's cool.
How you doing?
I, Deb Bodwin, am sitting here celebrating summer in Phoenix the way it was intended to be, hiding in my air-conditioned home. Yeah. So
it's a very natural way of doing it.
7 o'clock this morning, and it was already 86. By the time I got home, it was 91, and that was like less than a half an hour. I was like, oh yeah, with this rate, I am not going out after 10 o'clock in the morning. I may never go out until some fall.
Well, it's beautiful and green and lush. We've had a lot of rain the last couple of days, and it looks like we might have some more. So
that's awesome.
I am here. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you. We have been having technical issues for the last few months, honestly, between work and getting everything done. You had to move, and
yep.
we're just all over the place. So we do apologize for the reruns you've gotten for the last few months. I hope you didn't mind. I hope you enjoyed revisiting the old shows.
Yep.
So Deb,
mm-hmm.
Now that we're going back into this, what is our topic for today?
Well, something that I see pop up a lot that I think really deserves some attention. It's how to live a life of faith. See, people have this idea that, especially in my tradition, the Christian tradition, there's certain things you can do and certain things you're not doing. And they assume that is part of the Christian faith, but it's really not. It's the institutional choices that leaders have made, but it doesn't necessarily represent how Jesus wanted us to live at all. And I imagine you get a lot of that with pagan culture too, the difference between how the goddess wants you to be and how other people want to force you to be. Well, maybe it's not as much as ours, because our institutions are pretty hot and heavy for a very long time, but
it also depends on what flavor you're going.
Right.
With Catholic or with Christian, Judeo-Christian faiths, there, like you said, there is a very established ritual and very established expectation that you're pretty much born into when you're in that culture. Most people, it's not like this all that much anymore, but most people in my generation, their late 50s, came to paganism usually as a young adult or an adult, and with that came a choice that I don't think a lot of Judeo-Christian people have, which is you have the choice. Do you want to be a solitary practitioner? Do you want to be part of a very structured, ritualized group or coven? So it's not quite as difficult to escape the trappings in paganism, because there is that element of choice that I don't think a lot of Judeo-Christian people have.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting walk, because in order to practice Christianity, that is still a choice. You're not, regardless of how we are raised, to really look at the gospel hard and long and decide this is who I want to be. Like, that's a choice. But exactly. Yeah, there's an institutional world around us. And often, because in the Western world, all of our holidays, our structure of the week cater to the Christian faith. There's almost you can live your entire life without making that choice. I'm not talking about born again, follow Jesus kind of stuff. I'm talking about social justice, put yourself in the place where you're going to help others regardless of what it costs for you, like the real Jesus stuff.
Right.
That is something that even a lot of people in liberal traditions don't necessarily recognize. They've got to make that choice. They just assume the church is automatically going to be there. And then it just becomes so easy to fall into the trappings. Like, you've got to look nice to go to church. You've got to smell nice to be in church. You've got to be sober to be in church. You've got to be a nice person to be in church. And it becomes part of a cultural expectation that you can kind of like coast through. And that's not, it doesn't quite meet the kind of get your hands dirty Christianity that I think is more authentic, but it's comfortable.
Exactly. Well, yeah, and it does. I recognized growing up in a very culturalized Catholic community that it was a lot about what you look like, where you go, when you get there, where you sit, how you behave when you're there. And when you leave, nobody pays attention. Unless, of course, like me, you went to Catholic school and catechism and all that stuff. And then they were all watching you. But that's small town paranoia.
Well, that's small town reality, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't sneeze in one county with someone in the next without someone in the next county saying bless you,
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and that's small towns anywhere. But
exactly.
and that's kind of like the our discussion we had quite some time ago about sin. I mean, they're two different realities, but it's a distraction. Essentially, it removes your focus from where it needs to be. If you're constantly worried about your own behavior or someone else's behavior, then what time do you have left over to look around at the injustices you see around you that are actually what Christ called us to deal with?
Well, I kind of see sin in the same way I now see, dysfunction. Whereas, are you still, by doing this behavior, is it preventing you from living the life that you want to live? If you want to live, for instance, in a Christ-like fashion and do what Christ says, is your behavior counteractive to that? I mean, it's not, are you not following this rules? Are you not wearing the right sock color for your Catholic school uniform? That type of thing. And it's the same at least within my situation is with magic, with manifestation, with ritual, or in my case, meditation. Is my behavior moving me towards the level of spirituality, the level of consciousness, the level of connectedness and awareness that I want so that I can live the life I want? And like we have said many times, Sud, practicing faith, living faith, as opposed to following a religion, is a much more difficult choice.
It really is. And it's not a one and done choice either. It's a choice you have to make every morning, sometimes every hour, depending on that day. And it's a constant revisiting. Like, did I say something I shouldn't have? Did I do something, think something that was dismissive, and then that's not fair? And I don't want us to get into a level of paranoia, because that's exactly the same thing that institutions want people to do, this distraction from what real life in faith is supposed to look like. But reevaluating regularly, like when I goof, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to go back and apologize because either the moment's gone or any number of reasons. But me and myself, is that who I want to be again next time I'm in that situation? Like, so is this a Christ-like response? And in all honesty, a lot of times the answer is no, especially when I'm short-tempered and short of energy.
Exactly.
But I have to get up the next, kind of like you get up, you brush yourself off, and you try better next time. And the next time might be within the next minutes, or next time might be a month from now when you have the same scenario again. But it's a
Exactly.
conscious choice of well, making a decision to what that's going to look like, because it is really, really difficult in a society that wants to keep you banal and distracted, to actually be in the moment and try to make things better, even for just one person. It's rough. You're looked
And
down on quite a bit by society.
it's so funny because I think a lot of people really depend on rituals, and rituals such as, your prayer, meditation, all of these things, they are tools. They are not the religion
Yes.
itself.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, and I fall into this myself, I will find myself leaning on a certain set of standards or rituals or expectations to allow myself to go on autopilot. I know you memorize a set of rules, you follow those set of rules, you don't have to think. It's very hard to be mindful. And
Yeah.
mindful is such a buzzword right now, but it can mean prayer, it can mean awareness, it can mean whatever you need it to be, to
Yeah.
just be in the moment, in the present moment, because we live so much of our life. I particularly live so much of my life nowhere near the moment. And I try, and it always comes back to bite me in the butt.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with ritual either. It's when I'm teaching liturgy to folks, when I'm explaining it to them, I what I compare it to is their regular shower. When you have a shower, and anybody can try this. When you have a shower, you're in the bath getting clean anyway. There's a routine that you do that comes naturally to you, and your mind wanders. And that's kind of like a ritual in a religious situation. The whole idea was that your body is so involved in doing something else that your mind is free to be in with the spirit. But a lot of people who don't have that explained to them, that that's what the rituals are for. They're not the means to an end in themselves. They are just the way of getting your distractions, and your physicality doing their thing so that your spirit can be free to do the act of worship, um, or something
And
else. I remember one guy said, oh, I told them, I said, try it in a shower or in your bath. Try to do a different order of cleaning. And I said, one or two things will happen. It'll either be the most stressful shower of your life, or you'll forget and you go about doing it as you were. And of course, this guy decided he was going to prove me wrong. I never did get the answer back, but the whole idea that um, that ritual is a thought process was something he was holding on to really hard and fast. And it's not. It's a way of freeing your mind to do other things. But as I said, like, we do not explain that to people, so the ritual becomes the focus. And people think as long as they're following the ritual, or they're following the dictates, or the social expected behaviors, that's all it is. It's little wonder people who are truly wanting to think and talk about this find so much of institutional religion shallow and hypocritical, because it's not explained well that what the element of it is supposed to contribute, and it's not everything. It's just meant to kind of give some structure so you can go about doing the real work.
And there is a caveat to what you say, because
Mm-hmm.
yes, it does free your mind up, but you can still follow that ritual and have your mind go completely blank, go completely on autopilot, and choose how you're going to spin that autopilot, because
Oh,
you're
absolutely.
in
Yes.
that space. You can choose to focus on what you do to try to truly experience it,
Mm-hmm.
or you
Yep.
can focus on something that matters to you. But what we usually do when we're in autopilot is we think about what we have to do the next day. We start filling out lists in our head, make
Yep.
grocery lists, you know, ruminate over an argument we had with someone the day before that never got resolved. It's Not so much the ritual, but what you do with the experience of the ritual that matters.
Yes, yeah, and there's quite a bit of missed opportunity there if you're just kind of going to the daily mundane that you would do anyway. I mean, that's the kind of thing that when your brain is free, when you're driving and your brain is freed up, that's the kind of stuff. When you're trying to focus on your faith development or faith action,
Mm.
yeah, you kind of want to keep that focus going.
Well, back when I was writing music in the car, driving, mindless driving was the absolute best time for me to write
Yep,
music.
yep.
You know,
I
I had that
I find
freedom.
anytime I'm in water, swimming or
Mhm.
bathing or whatever, that's when my flow starts to really happen. Yeah, there's something fantastic about the having the body distracted, um, so that your mind is free to go someplace else where it needs to be.
And that's the thing. Again, ritual is a tool. The
Yeah.
structure is a tool. The religion is a tool. The
Hmm.
religion, the ritual, the structure, that is not the faith. That is not the
Yeah.
actual spiritual practice. It is just a method to get there. Getting there is on the individual.
Yeah.
And
And
unfortunately, so many of us, myself included, lose sight of that sometimes.
well, yeah, because you're in a society where we're often told that's all there is to it.
Mhm.
And I mean, I even look people in like my job, people who are commissioned and uh, told to go out and make this make sense so that people understand how the faith process is supposed to exist. And we don't talk about any of this and how faith develops. I mean, there are gateways to developing faith. Prayer is a huge one. But even teaching people how to pray seems to be such a um, is something that so many people in leadership in the ritual institutions are not even interested in teaching,
Oh, and
or
another,
they think that just like a rote is good enough, that you don't it doesn't go down deep enough to people being able to make that connection. They're just simply doing whatever language is given to them, um,
and
and it devolves into religiosity, really.
sadly, wrote it drives more people from religion than brings them into it,
Precisely, yeah.
because that is literally what drove me from Catholicism. Was I was
Mhm.
literally sitting in French class reciting the Hail Mary in French with the rest of my class and thinking, we don't even pay attention to what we're saying in English. We certainly don't know what we're saying in French. And I was like,
Yeah.
this is all just pointless. Why are we doing this?
Yep. I remember my turning point was a youth event I attended when I was, I don't know, 14, 15, 16, somewhere in there. And we were looking at what's commonly referred to as the Lord's Prayer, and Catholics call it Our Father, Protestants call it the Lord's Prayer. And it's the first time I really looked at the words that said, when you pray, pray like this. It does not say pray this prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly it's like, okay, this is a structure. This is pins to hang on the concerns that we should have. This is not something to memorize and be done with. And I thought that was such a phenomenal observation. And it's amazing how many times now I bring it up in congregations when I'm teaching or preaching, and people older than me, it's the first time it's ever dawned on them that this is strictly um, a, a structure to pray, and how much easier it is now to pray once they catch how that structure is, and they can adjust it to the concerns that they have for themselves. And I mean, when I'm in farm country, give us this day our daily prayer takes on a whole different meaning than if I'm with a bunch of people who are more executive in the city. They're the ones that are stuck on forgive our trespasses, because that has deeper weight to them. Um, but yeah, to look at the the structure as a structure, not as the be all and end all. It's an awareness that many people are just not encouraged to have.
But
And I get that
if we did have it, don't
that members of the management in institutions like to have. They like it neat. They like it their way, and and faith is not neat. It's pretty messy.
well,
It
life
doesn't
is
fit
not
well.
neat. It isn't, it's messy. And I think at least I know the company that I work for. I work for a very large American corporation, and it's actually a good corporation. They are coming to the understanding that life is messy and things, and they are actually making choices to adjust, to make it more flexible, because we are not robots, and
Mhm.
you are not just butts in the seat of your church. You are people, and everyone has a unique experience, which I think is one of the reasons why so many people who are of Judeo-Christian ilk have left the structured church and gone to a more holistic version of that faith. I see so many people that are still very deep, profound Christians, but they've just said no to the church
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
because we're
I've
not
told
cookie
more
cutter
than
people.
yeah, I've told more than a few congregations really focus on where your goal is. If your goal is to build up your congregation, you've already failed. So just accept that. If your goal is to develop a lifestyle where we recognize we're called to change the world for the better, that's happening. Tap into it, because that's alive and well and very, very healthy. It is kind of exciting. And I'm one of those people who, even though I'm paid by the institution, I'm not sad to see it fading away. It's needed to happen for some time anyway, but the fact that there's an organic, well, from my perspective, there's an organic Christianity growing and thriving now, very reminiscent of 2,000 years ago, when that's what the proto Christians looked like. Whether in a few hundred years we'll be stuck with a new set of institutions, who knows? Humans are human. But right now, there's a beautiful organic sense where people are wanting to shed a lot of the social expectations of the institution, because they recognize that is not what a lived faith looks like. They might not necessarily have the language to identify what it is, but they've got good instincts to identify what it isn't.
And I think we'd be well advised to just touch on the understanding that we are in a transition time. Christians are in a transition
Yes.
time. Humans are in a transition time. We are in a very tumultuous time.
Yeah.
And just like childbirth, just like death, big ass transitions are painful and scary, and you're going to see the backlash against it. You're going to see people hiding in their old safe ways. You're going to see people actually becoming angry at any change,
Very
even if
much.
it's a good change.
Very
I
much.
mean,
Yeah.
you can see it in my country. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's very, very clear to see.
Yes.
But it's, you think
Yeah.
about those cockroaches and those turtles and those little furry mammals that were watching the dinosaurs crash around them after the comet came, and they're huddling in their burrows. That had to be a very terrifying time for them, but they survived
Mm-hmm.
because they stayed the course. If you
Yeah.
fight against change, if you thrash against it, you suffer more. And
Yeah. One of the things I point out, and which relaxes people a little bit, is that every 500 years in the Christian tradition, you can look at it. It's like clockwork. Every 500 years, we have a major upheaval. So the first 500 years was the collapse of the Western Roman Empire and the estrangement of the North African churches from the Greek and Roman. 500 years later, we have the separation from the Greek church and the Roman church. 500 years later, we have the separation between the Protestants and the Catholics within the Western church. We're in that
We're
500
due.
year mark now. We're right in the middle of it.
We're
Absolutely right in the
due.
middle of it. Yeah. And that's, if you could put some historic perspective on it, relaxes people a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit, to realize, okay, this is just the cycle that we're part of, and we've just got to ride it out. We're not going to see the end of it, but you know what? We didn't necessarily see the beginning of it either.
You know what?
This change cycle that we're in.
I'm 50. I turned 58 on Tuesday, and I'm going to tell you right now. Do you know how many end of the worlds I've survived at this point?
I looked it up one time in Wikipedia. Yeah.
It's it's the end of the world. Yeah, we get it. It's always the end of the world.
Yep.
Still wake up next day, you put on your clothes, you do what you got to do. And
No, that's just it. And the myopia and the arrogance of each generation thinking they're it always amuses me. It's like, do you think honestly that they're the first ones that have had this kind of experience and think that we're seeing the end of days? You know what? Those who are dealing with those 2 years around 400 where the sun was blighted out may have had an opinion on that. Or, those who were seeing the Crusaders roll through might have had an opinion on that. Or, hey, you know what? The Black Plague.
Honestly, you
humans have
want to get some
survived.
perspective, study planetary geology, historical planetary geology. Study the life cycle of a star. There have had 5 major not genocides, what are they called? Collapses of life on Earth, where we had just gone down to a thread, a nub, barely hanging on. Everything on the planet was wiped out except for a little bit. If we can survive that, I'm pretty sure we can survive drag queens reading storybooks to kids on the weekends, you know. But
Yeah.
then the same people who are having problem with drag queens reading kids stories are probably not going to believe all that paleontology and geology anyway. So there you go.
No, sure enough. No. But it gets us back to the original point where we start talking about making a choice to be people who living in a faith that makes difference, makes change, as opposed to being locked into a tradition or an institution that is immovable. There's comfort, but it's not growth.
I think in the end, you have to make a couple of choices.
Yeah.
One, you have to choose to believe that there's a point. You can't just believe this is the end of the world, so why even try?
Well, and a point that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to understand it or see it. That's kind of the modification there, because people are looking for points that make sense to them, and that's not necessarily how it's going to be.
That was the second point I was getting to, is get comfortable with not knowing the answer.
See, smart brains alike.
Smart brains. Accept the fact that there is a point, and accept the fact that you're probably not going to know what that point is, but you still have to act as if.
Yeah.
Because you are living on this planet and you're looking for a point, maybe making the planet better for everyone could be your point. If you want to choose a point, choose that one.
Yeah. And that's really where the Christian faith leads. I mean, one of the things that I find a lot of people haven't spent much time talking about, and I really challenge this for folks, is the point of Christianity is not to worship God. It really isn't. The point of Christianity is to change the world for everyone, and that Jesus died showing how it could happen, and also showing the backlash that you're going to get when you push very comfortable people to change.
And this is something that our faiths share. The point is not the religion. The point is what you do with it.
Yeah.
And
and the religion in many ways just puts you into a wider community of people who see things the same way that you do.
Right.
Or have a sensibility about it.
And when you get to that point, when you get to the point where you're looking beyond the rote and the ritual and the expectations, That's where these differences start to break down, and you realize that people you might have seen as scary or different or even your enemy are actually people who are working for the exact same thing you are.
Yeah.
And if we can just move enough people towards that to get some kind of critical mass, we can do a great deal to end a lot of the conflict that's going on because of these differences.
Yes. Well, and that's often is reaching across traditional lines to
Mhm.
people who are going to have metaphors and images that you don't necessarily share. And institutions have taught you to fear that we're, especially, I mean, the tradition that I'm part of has a long history of saying we're right and everyone else is wrong. And I don't know enough about any other tradition that whether or not they say the same thing. So I'm not going to pretend that we're the only bad guys in the game.
And it's,
But
I don't even know if it's a bad guy. I think it's just a thing, it's a
it
thing
could be,
that does not work.
yeah. No, and ultimately that's the whole point. When you have that level of false superiority, you're not even able to let the faith do what it's supposed to do, let alone be able to reach across barriers and recognize that someone else may have completely different language, but the intentionality is similar or the same.
And once you think you have all the answers, you have completely destroyed your ability to learn.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
So, yeah, a little bit of doubt is a good thing. I have a dear friend once who said that certainty is the enemy of faith.
Yes, very much.
And I
Yep.
love that because if you were certain, you wouldn't need faith.
Yes.
And if
Yeah.
you're certain, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Bottom line, that's a hill I will die on. If you are certain, you're wrong because there is
Yeah.
always something that you don't know about any situation.
Yeah. What I usually tell congregations is if you're comfortable, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
I think that's a pretty universal kind of truism for faith in general, regardless of the structure and the language and the metaphors and the images that we use. If we're comfortable where we are, we're not living up to the promise.
I think we could actually extend that beyond faith. I think you could look that in any part of life. If you're comfortable, if you're confident, not confident, but
Assured.
yeah, and that's not the word I'm looking for, but ADHD brain is having a moment. If you are complacent,
Yeah.
you're you are doing it wrong because the universe, the world, life, our own brains are so much bigger than we can ever comprehend that the minute you start thinking that you know everything, you're starting to die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's a hard way to live because you may not be comfortable, but you have to be pragmatic and accepting that the fact that the ground is not solid under your feet.
Yeah. Which is where I think when we make the transition from just following the rote expected behavior to making that conscious decision that this is a lifestyle we want to live, I think that's where we can maybe not comfort so much as more reassured that perhaps this might possibly, I mean, how many conditions can I get in there, be where we're supposed to be.
And that whatever choice you make, it's a choice you were going to make, and you always have the option to make a different choice at a later time. You may have to deal with the ramifications of any choice you made, but
Yes.
it's an understanding that you
Yeah.
can't. Yeah, I know. We're
Well, especially if you're not living up to the ideals that you perceive as a lived faith to start with.
Yeah. And unfortunately, so many of the ideals that we have are imposed upon us from the outside and not the inside. And one of the things about breaking free of ritual or using ritual to become more mindful is that you start to develop a sense of which goals, which ideals that you are living with come from a place of truth as opposed to just enforced on you from the outside. And you can start developing a sense of understanding which goals and ideals you can let go because they're just bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's hard. It takes a long time to get there.
Yeah, I also think there's a kind of a bit of a side road to that. When we are spiritually, emotionally exhausted, those are the times when we can just rest on the rituals and the procedures, the liturgies, the practices to carry us a little bit. We can't live there is the problem.
Exactly.
But resting there for a little bit is okay as we kind of get that strength and our focus back.
It's like a structure. It's like the frame of a housework. You've been working on it all day and you're tired. You lean against the scaffolding. It supports you while you catch your breath. And that's what rituals can be, but they are not the end all be all.
No, not at all. And that's where it comes back to a choice to live a life that is, well, in my tradition, has already been demonstrated through the Gospels, the life of Jesus, to make a difference, to stand up. Like, are you hungry? Let's feed you. Are you tired? Do you need medical care? Do you need someplace to sleep for a while? Like, all that's, the Gospels are basically a how-to of how to just do the job without worrying. I mean, Jesus saved lots of his criticism for those who wanted to perpetuate the institutions.
Mm-hmm. And
I'm not sure there's any equivalent in a pagan tradition.
You're living it right now. You're out in the wilderness. You're loving the earth. You're loving nature. You're loving the world, and you are communing with other people. So we are less than a minute in. So we're gonna have to wrap this up, my friend. I am Deb Bodwin.
And I'm Deb Suttard.
And we are the Preacher and the Pagan, and you are our listeners. Thank you so much. Come back next month. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Preacher and the Pagan with Deborah Suttard and Deborah Bodwin. This podcast is a two-lady podcast production in conjunction with The Barefoot Evangelist. Our producer and sound editor is Catherine Gordon. Our theme music was composed by Deborah Bodwin. You can reach us at thepreacherandthepagan@gmail.com or by visiting our website at barefootevangelist.ca/podcast.